of laughter. At Beth's questioning glance, she shook her head. "'Tis no wonder the tailor kept nudging you. He was most like trying to figure out whether you were deformed or just sporting a melon down there." When Beth didn't join in her laughter, but merely looked dejected over her mistake, Charlie quickly changed the subject. "What did you do after you left the tailor's?" "We went to Radcliffe's club," she murmured, brightening at once. "His club?" Charlie exclaimed jealously, and Beth nodded. "Oh, aye. It was just marvellous. All these men looking important and officious, servants everywhere, and goodness, Charlie, men do not act nearly so stiff and polite when women are not around. Why, they were positively boyish. Joking and laughing and having a jolly good time. I met all sorts of nice young men. Radcliffe made a point of acquainting me with as many of the fellows our age as possible. He said it would be good for me to make some chums. He left me with a bunch of them while he spoke with some business acquaintances. It was jolly fun, and a good opportunity to size them up. Oh, that reminds me. Should you meet a dark-haired fellow named Jimmy, or a blonde named Freddie, give them a wide berth. They are having some sort of competition to see who can seduce the most young women of the ton this season, and are taking wagers on it. From what was said this afternoon, they have ruined nearly half this season's females already." She nodded firmly when Charlie gaped at her, then lay back on the bed with a sigh. "I am positively exhausted. Yes, indeed. What a day!" She stretched, smothered a yawn, then glanced at Charlie to ask politely, "How was your day?" "My day?" Charlie reached behind her to grasp the corner of a pillow. "Well, my day was just great. While you were gallivanting about having a marvellous time, I was being poked and prodded by a Madame de Cow. Does that not sound amusing?" she asked sweetly, then clobbered the grinning girl over the head with the pillow and slid off the bed with disgust. Laughing, Beth pushed the pillow aside and rolled onto her stomach to prop her chin on the heels of her hands. "It serves you right for all those years of allowing me to serve as dressmaker's doll," she announced unsympathetically. Then her eyes widened as she finally actually looked at her sister. Sitting up abruptly, she slid her feet off the bed and stood to rush forward. "You are wearing a different gown. Do you not tell me this DeCow woman finished her dress already?" "No, of course not," Charlie murmured, as her sister moved around her in a circle. "I promised her extra money if she worked quickly, but even so, she could only promise a gown a day, starting tomorrow if she hired another couple of workers." "Then where?" "She was preparing this for someone who had similar measurements to us. When she realized that Elizabeth only had one dress, she sent for it immediately." "Is that not marvellous?" Beth tugged here and there at the material. "This person does have the same measurements. It fits you perfectly." "Aye, well, actually the lady was a bit taller and larger in the waist, but Madame had one of the girls take it in as we plodded through her book of designs." "Book of designs?" Beth frowned at that. "What did you choose?" Charlie's eyebrows rose. "Why the sudden interest? You were not the least concerned when you left this morning." "Well, in my excitement I fear I forgot you have no experience at such tasks." Charlie smiled slowly at the other girl's obvious trepidation. "Aye, well, never fear, dear sister. Beth shall love her gowns. After all, she chose them. Though I must confess, Madame de Cow was a bit dismayed at one or two of the choices." On that note, she turned on her heel and quickly left the room, hurrying down the hall toward the stairs. She actually made it halfway there before Beth regained herself enough to come after her. What do you mean, dismayed? What did you choose?" she asked anxiously, grabbing her arm to stop her. "You shall see," Charlie murmured, slipping free and continuing forward. "But, oh wait, I forgot to tell you. We have been invited to the theatre tonight." "We have?" Charlie paused to face her sister, her gown swirling about her legs as she did. "By whom?" "Tommy." When Charlie stared blankly, Beth coloured and clarified, "Thomas Mowbray. He invited us to share his box with him, and his sister Clarissa." Charlie glanced at her in the newly tailored men's clothes. The outfit was rather sharp. Radcliffe's doing, no doubt, The man had impeccable taste. "Well?" Charlie's eyebrows flew up. "Well, what?" "Well, do you not think we should go?" I told him I was not sure at the time, because we only had the one gown, and he had already seen me in it. But now that Madame de Cowle has provided a second gown, well, it does seem the thing to do. To meet other prospective husbands, she pointed out hopefully. Aye, of course we must go. The idea is to get married after all, and we cannot manage that should we not go out and about. Besides, I have been bored to tears all day. It will be nice to get out for a bit." "Good." Beth's relief was obvious as she suddenly snatched Charlie's arm up and turned her back toward the bedroom, dragging her along. "Come along, then." "Why?" "We must change," Beth explained, dragging her into the bedroom. "Into what? I told you this was the only gown Madame de Cowle had available. Do you not think this will suit?" "Oh, it will suit. I meant switch clothes back to my being Beth and you being—" "Now, just wait a minute, Beth. I'm not going to the theatre as Charles. I thought you wished to be the brother for the day." "Well, I did. I did. I thought you had fun at the club and the—" "I did, but I—" She looked uncomfortable, and Charlie's gaze narrowed. "Why do you not tell me more about Thomas Mowbray?" Her sister's flush was answer enough, and Charlie sighed. "I see," she murmured. It seemed her sister had taken a liking to the man and wished to be Elizabeth around him. "I am sorry," Beth began unhappily. "If you wish to continue as Beth for the evening, then surely you should. The full day was the agreement after all." "Do not be silly," Charlie chided, reaching up to begin undoing the dress she wore. "'Tis just the theatre." "Thank you, Charlie," Beth murmured gratefully. "'Tis all right," she responded, then sighed slightly as she realized she would now suffer several hours of Clarissa's tender mercies. "Charles!" Charlie sighed as she recognized the voice moments before she spotted Clarissa Mowbray making her way toward where she, Beth, and Radcliffe stood. Thomas Mowbray was hard on the girl's heels, doing his damnedest to keep up with her as she charged through the mob. "Tom said you were coming tonight. I was so happy at the news," Clarissa gasped as she latched her hands onto Charlie's arm. "Aye, well, I'm sure," Charlie murmured uncomfortably, doing her best to escape the girl's clutches, but finding the task extraordinarily difficult. "Mowbray?" Radcliffe greeted Clarissa's brother with amusement as the breathless man reached them. "Lord Radcliffe!" Thomas smiled wryly at the man, then grabbed his sister's arm to tug her away from Charlie. Between that and Charlie's own efforts, they managed to remove her grasp. "For God's sake, Clarissa, leave the fellow alone," he muttered irritably, then tossed an apologetic smile Charlie's way. "Sorry, friend. She's always been rather like a bull terrier. I expect it's from competing for attention with mother's dogs." Ignoring Clarissa's irate gasp at that, Thomas turned his gaze to Beth, his smile widening as it fell on her in the lavender gown. "Lady Beth, you look a sight." "Thank you, my lord," Beth murmured shyly. "And thank you for inviting us to join you tonight." "My pleasure," he grinned widely, seemingly oblivious to the frantic tugging Clarissa was trying in an attempt to free herself. Charlie glanced curiously at Radcliffe, wondering how he was responding to the other couple's behaviour after having shared that kiss with who he thought was Beth in the library. But he appeared not even to notice. His gaze instead was watching Charlie herself with amusement as she sidled cautiously away from the amorous Clarissa. "Shall we go in?" Charlie glanced around to see her sister smile sweetly at Thomas and place her hand on the free arm he now raised toward her. Mowbray then reached up to clasp that small hand, dropping the hold he had on his sister as he walked Beth to the doors. Stifling a sigh of disappointment, Charlie managed not to wince as Clarissa's claws closed around her arm again, drawing her forward. "Come, you will enjoy the show." "Somehow I doubt that very much," Charlie muttered, then glared at a laughing Radcliffe. "Come along, Radcliffe. You would not wish to miss the show." "No, indeed I wouldn't," he agreed with amusement, following slowly behind and peering from Beth to Charles as he went. He had noticed the attraction between Beth and Thomas, and had awaited a sense of disappointment or jealousy. But there was none forthcoming. In fact, despite that passionate embrace in the library, he found his attention once again being dragged back to the brother. For instance, just now he had noticed the sweet upside-down heart that his behind made in the breeches he wore. Charles did not have a man's behind, he realized, glancing around at the other male patrons with a frown. Not one of the other men present had as nice a behind, and none of them made him want to keep looking or drew his eye the way Charlie's pert little bottom did. He did not know whether to be relieved by that or further distressed. What the devil was the matter with him? He had never even looked at another man's body before, not really. Certainly not like this. Yet now this boy, this stripling, drew his attention and desire like no woman ever had. There, he had said it. He desired the boy. Good God, he was losing his mind, he realized with dismay. He had no desire to be with a man. He did, however, fervently wish that Charles was a woman. His gaze slid to Beth. She was, for all intents and purposes, a female version of Charles, and he had felt incredible passion with her in the library. But he did not now. It was all very confusing. Radcliffe pushed such thoughts away as he overheard Tom inviting them on a picnic the next day. "A small affair," he was saying, "but we would love to have you there." "Is it not lovely?" Beth breathed happily. "Charming," Charlie muttered, disgruntled, not even bothering to glance about the grassy glen they had disembarked upon. The theatre the night before had been a hellish experience, thanks to one Clarissa Mowbray and her calf-like infatuation. Today was going no better, since she had once again found herself finagled into being Charles. "Oh, Charlie, do not be such a grump. It is a lovely day for a picnic, and well, if Clarissa paws me one more time, I swear I shall—" Her words came to an abrupt halt as Beth gave a tinkling laugh. Catching sight of Charlie's narrowed eyes, Beth stifled her laughter and tried for an apologetic look that fell decidedly short of sincerity. Sighing, she shook her head in wry amusement, then murmured, "She does seem quite taken with you." "Taken with me?" Charlie harumphed in disgust. "She is like a particularly virulent branch of ivy. She clings to me at every opportunity. Truly, the chit is— Oh, drat!" she muttered, as she spied the girl in question, making her way determinedly toward them. Charlie had spent the better part of the hour-long journey doing her best to avoid Clarissa Mowbray, an impossible feat when trapped on a barge with 100 other people. Still, Charlie had given it a go, repeatedly disengaging the hands that clawed at her sleeve and fleeing with little concern for politeness. Clarissa had neither seemed to notice nor care that Charlie was showing a distinct lack of interest in her charms. Truly, the girl seemed to have no self-esteem at all. She was certainly lacking in dignity. She had literally chased Charlie about the ship like a puppy chasing its master. It was all rather embarrassing as far as Charlie was concerned, and terribly wearing as well. If Clarissa ever did find a husband, Charlie suspected the man would be brought down by sheer lack of energy. The girl would wear him down until it seemed easier to give in than fight any longer. Charlie decided she had best do something about the determined lady, or she was going to spend a decidedly uncomfortable afternoon. "There you are!" Clarissa exclaimed, as if they had not been playing hide-and-seek for the last hour. Latching firmly onto Charlie's arm, she positively beamed with triumph. "Goodness, you are as slippery as a fish. I wanted to show you a spot a little further along the river, but you slipped away." Charlie remained silent as she was dragged off, sparing merely a glare for her laughing sister, then concentrated on negotiating her way through the crowds of people as Clarissa led her away from the still disembarking guests. The Mowbrays' idea of a small picnic was piling 60 people on a barge along with nearly as many servants, then transporting them downstream to a suitably grassy spot for a light luncheon at temporary tables and chairs. Had Charlie realized it was to be such a hullabaloo, she would have politely declined and spent the day at home. Well, perhaps not. As boring as she found this outing, pacing about Radcliffe's townhouse seemed worse. At least this way she could see how Radcliffe and Beth interacted with each other. Not that today's adventure was disclosing anything of interest. Radcliffe had been greeted and drawn into a crowd of rather staunch-looking older men the moment they had arrived, while Beth and Charlie had been swallowed up by the younger set. Her gaze slid to Radcliffe now. He was still standing with the older men. Not one of them was less than 20 years older than him, and she frowned as she recalled Beth telling her that he had done the same thing the day before at the club, leaving her in the company of the young bucks and wandering off to discuss business matters with his elders. She was coming to the conclusion that he had quite forgotten how young he was. How young was he? She wondered suddenly, and frowned as she peered at him. He did not yet look 30. She would put him at 28 or so. That made him 8 years older than herself and Beth. Yet he acted at least twice that. Sad, really. A shame. A gasp drew her attention back to Clarissa as the girl stumbled over an uneven patch of land. Charlie steadied her with a hand at her elbow that the girl quickly clutched and squeezed warmly. "Thank you, my lord," Clarissa half whispered the words of gratitude, her gaze adoring until Charlie shook her hand free and indicated that she should lead the way. It didn't take long for her to realize that Clarissa didn't have a clue where she was going. There was no path to follow, and they were stumbling through the woods like two lost bulls. It was obvious there was no spot Clarissa wanted to show her, or actually Charles. She had just wanted to get him alone, and it did not take much thought to figure out why. Charlie had to give the girl credit. She was a bold bit of fluff. Still, her boldness was likely to get them in trouble. "Clarissa," she said at last, catching the girl's arm and drawing her to a halt. "We should head back." "Oh, no, the spot is just ahead," Clarissa murmured almost urgently, and Charlie shook her head with irritation. The girl was a worse liar than Beth. "Enough," she snapped, turning back the way they had come. "It is obvious you do not know where you are going, and I have no wish to get lost in the woods today." "Oh, but—" Clarissa caught her arm desperately, drawing her to a halt, pleading naked on her face until she glimpsed the irritation in Charlie's expression. Once she did, she dropped her hold at once and peered down at the ground, unhappiness falling about her like a cloak. "I'm sorry, Charles. 'Tis obvious you had no desire to walk with me." Charlie shifted uncomfortably. Clarissa looked so pitiful. It was obvious she was desperate to be liked. Unfortunately, she seemed to have no idea how to go about it. Feeling most of her irritation slip away, Charlie sighed. "It is not that I would not enjoy a walk with you, Clarissa, but it is not proper for a young girl to be alone with a young man," she explained uncomfortably, wondering how she got herself into these situations. "The man might take advantage. That is why parents insist on chaperones. As your mother should have," she added dryly. "My mother couldn't be bothered," Clarissa muttered, then added earnestly, "and I was rather hoping you might take advantage. I would not mind, really." "What?" Charlie gasped, scandalized, and Clarissa blushed, but nodded anyway. "Truly, if you wish to kiss me, I would not mind. I was rather hoping you might like to." On that note, she closed her eyes and tipped her head up in anticipation. Charlie stared at the girl in dismay for a moment, then shook her head and started walking back through the woods toward the other picnickers. She had taken a mere few steps when Clarissa opened her eyes to see her escaping. Like a bulldog with a bone, she was after her at once. "Wait! You cannot go back! Are you not going to kiss me? Her words shuddered to a halt when Charlie whirled on her in a temper, her patience spent. "Stop hounding me, you silly little girl! Whatever is the matter with you? Have you no pride at all? Or has that gone the way of the wind along with your sense? You shall be ruined ere you even have your coming out at this rate. Hoping I would take advantage of you, indeed. You are lucky I am not one of those fellows that are taking bets on seeing how many girls they can ruin this season, or you would be ruined already." When Clarissa paled, tears springing to her eyes, Charlie suddenly felt an idiot. The silly chit was annoying, but she was also innocent and young, and, well, hell, that was reason enough for her foolishness. Truly, Charlie supposed most girls in the first bloom of womanhood were equally silly. It was just that usually they had someone to look out for them. Clarissa seemed sadly lacking in that area, which Charlie supposed explained her seeming desperation for someone to pay attention to her. Shifting uncomfortably as one big fat tear after another rolled down the girl's pale face, Charlie sighed and reached out to pat her awkwardly on the shoulder. "Do not cry. You are safe with me. I am not taking bets on ruining girls this season," she murmured, a bit laconically, sighing when Clarissa suddenly threw herself against her chest, weeping copiously, all over the new waistcoat the tailor had delivered only that morning. "I am an idiot," Clarissa cried in self-loathing, and Charlie frowned. "Nay, nay, you are not an idiot, Clarissa. 'Tis just that you must be more careful. All men are not gentlemen, and you certainly must never suggest they take advantage of you." She shuddered inwardly at the thought of what would have happened if the girl had thrown herself at someone like the Jimmy and Freddie that Beth had been telling her about. "That was stupid of me," Clarissa admitted with a sniffle. "I am always doing stupid things. It is why no one likes me." Charlie scowled. "You are not stupid, Clarissa, and I am sure a great many people like you." "Do you think so?" she asked hopefully. "Well, certainly." "Do you like me?" Charlie forced a smile when Clarissa pulled away to peer up at her. "Of course." "Then you may kiss me." So saying, she tipped her head up once more, lips puckered and eyes squinted closed. Charlie pushed her away at once. "You have not heard a word I said." Clarissa's eyes blinked open at once. I did, and you said I was safe with you, so why can you not kiss me? You said you liked me, Charles." Charlie sighed at her reasoning unhappily, then, for want of a better excuse, muttered, "There is such a thing as being too enthusiastic, you know." Clarissa peered at her uncertainly, but Charlie wasn't too concerned. It seemed to her that she had struck on a way to help keep Clarissa safe and get the girl to leave her alone at the same time. "Truly," she averred, nodding her head. "Think of a fox hunt. The fox is released to run and hide, and the hunters chase after him. The hunters chase because the fox runs. Sometimes they will chase for hours and hours. The longer the chase, the more exciting the victory when the animal is caught. Is this not so?" "Aye," she agreed uncertainly. "And were the fox not to run at all, but to simply stand there and allow itself to be caught, where would be the sense in the hunt? It would be no fun, would it?" "No, I suppose not." "Well, there you are then," she nodded firmly, sure she had explained it so that the girl understood. "So, you are saying that you refuse to kiss me and do your best to avoid me, to keep me chasing you." Charlie blinked at that, her mouth dropping open briefly before she gasped, "Nay, good Lord, you are impossible. You are the fox." "But I am not running." Charlie rolled her eyes and took a deep breath before gritting out, "That is the point. If you wish people to chase you, you should be running in the other direction." "But I do not wish for people to chase me. I just want you to like me." Charlie sighed at that, wondering what unlucky fates had decided she should be Charles today, and not Beth. "Clarissa, my dear, men, such as, myself, prefer a chase. It is more interesting and, exciting. We like to—" she shrugged helplessly. "Chase." Clarissa hesitated, then asked, "You mean to say that were I to run, you would give chase?" "Aye." "And you would like that?" "I. Well." She shook her head unhappily, then straightened her shoulders and sighed resolutely. "If 'tis what you wish, Charles." Pausing, she glanced consideringly at the bush that surrounded them, then glanced back. "Which direction shall I run in?" Charlie rolled her eyes and groaned. "Clarissa, I was using a metaphor." "A metaphor?" "An example," Charlie explained impatiently. "I do not truly wish to dash about the woods after you. I'm saying you must pretend that you do not care for me." She blinked in dismay. "But I do like you." "I know that, but you should pretend that you do not. You should ignore me, give me the cut direct, do whatever you think necessary to convince me you are not the least bit interested in me." "But what will you be doing while I am ignoring you?" "Me? I shall be admiring you, from afar." "From afar?" She did not look the least pleased with the idea, and seemed about to protest, so Charlie blurted out, "'Tis all the rage. It's considered most romantic." "Romantic?" She perked up at that. "Aye, I shall write love poetry about my broken heart." "And send them to me?" she asked, excitedly, bringing a frown to Charlie's face. "Nay, I am no good at poetry. They shall be horrible and morbid, so I shall crumple them up, throw them into the fire, and suffer most horribly." "Suffer?" she asked in alarm. "Oh, Charles, I do not wish you to suffer." "Our parish priest says suffering is good for the soul," Charlie told her firmly, taking the girl's arm to lead her back in the direction from which they had come. "Oh," she murmured as they paused on the edge of the woods. "Well, if you think this is for the best—" "It is definitely for the best," Charlie assured her, laconically, then added, "and you must promise me that you shall stay away from anyone named Jimmy or Freddie." "As you wish, Charles," she murmured dutifully. "Good girl," Charlie muttered, peering through the bushes at the people beyond. "No one appears to be looking now. You go on back to the picnic. I shall wait a moment, then follow so as not to detract talk." "Yes, Charles." Turning, she stepped into the clearing. Charlie watched her go with a sigh of relief, then moved to lean against the trunk of a tree and wait the appropriate amount of time necessary before returning herself. Chapter 9. Radcliffe moved through the picnickers, his gaze searching the laughing, chatting people for Charles. He had not seen the boy for quite some time and was beginning to worry, more than he really should, he realized on a sigh, and shook his head at his own behavior. As much as he told himself he should concentrate on the sister and avoid the boy altogether, he could not help himself. The moment Charles had traipsed into the breakfast-room that morning and beamed a cheerful smile at him, he had realized how impossible the task would be. There was just something magnetic about the boy, endearing even. He had enjoyed a rousing conversation with the lad at the table about the current political situation, and laughed heartily at his wit. That was not so bad, but when their hands had met as they both reached for the marmalade at the same time, Radcliffe had felt a shock of awareness run through him that had sat him back in his seat with dismay. It was most distressing. One day he found himself taking advantage of the sister who was supposed to be under his protection, and the next he was feeling things for the brother that he had never felt for any member of the male sex in his life. It was all beyond his understanding, and he had decided that it would simply be best if he kept his distance as much as he could from the twins. And he truly would have given both brother and sister a wide berth today, had he not already agreed to take them on this picnic. Still, he had managed to avoid them nicely up until now, leaving them in the company of the other young men and women that had been invited on this picnic, and placing himself with the older set. He would still be there, talking economics and politics, had Charles not gone missing. He thought with irritation as he reached the spot where Beth stood chatting amicably with Thomas and Clarissa Mowbray. "Where is Charles?" he asked without preamble, and the threesome turned in surprise at his interruption. "Charles?" Beth repeated blankly, then glanced about. "Oh, well, he was here not long ago. He went for a walk in the woods." Radcliffe glanced sharply at the young Mowbray girl when she blurted out that answer, and she immediately blushed guiltily under his gaze. "Where?" he demanded. "In the woods. He, wished to get away from the crowd for a bit. No doubt he shall return shortly." Radcliffe frowned, considering whether it was necessary for him to hunt the boy down, then sighed unhappily. It seemed the wiser thing to do. The lad was in his care, after all. Besides, after the fiasco at Aggie's, he did not trust the boy to have the sense of a gnat. No one else, he knew, could have ended up tied to the bedposts by a whip-brandishing old whore. The boy, he thought to himself, may very well be lost. Charlie cursed and grabbed at the wig on her head as another branch caught at it, then released her hold on the item to swat at a bug buzzing near her face. She had never been much of an outdoors sort. Truly as boring as the picnic had proven to be up to now, she would much rather be back in the clearing, seated at a temporary table, dining on squab and pigeon pie, than struggling her way through this thick underbrush, headed for heaven knew where. And she certainly would have been, had she not heard a distressed cry just as she'd been about to re-enter the clearing. Charlie could not ignore such obvious fear, even when it was that of an animal, and when the cry came again, she had given up the idea of returning to the picnic and started in the direction from which the cries appeared to be coming. They had led her away from the picnic, but closer to the river's edge, she realized as she set her foot down and found it sinking in spongy, damp ground. Pausing, she stepped back, frowning at the damage to her shoe, then glared at the branches of the bush before her and continued forward once more as the whining became a panic sort of squealing, whimpering, and mewling. After a moment the frantic cries were suddenly muffled, and Charlie stiffened, the silencing of the sound alarming her more than the actual squeals had. Her throat tight with anxiety, Charlie lunged through the brush and nearly stumbled to her knees in surprise when the undergrowth gave way abruptly to another clearing. This one was much smaller than the first, and held a leathery-faced farmer who was in the process of tossing a squirming sack into the river. "Nay!" she cried in alarm, but it was too late. The sack was already tumbling through the air toward the water. Without thinking about it, Charlie sped forward, hurtling into the water after the bag. She was quick on land, but the water seemed to drag at her feet, making each step an effort. Still, she continued determinedly forward, a frustrated curse slipping from her lips as the sack dropped into the water some 10 feet in front of her and immediately sank below the surface, the river swallowing it up, silencing the crazed mewlings the sack emitted. It seemed like hours to Charlie, but was probably only seconds as she waded to where the sack had landed. Unconcerned that she was soaking herself and ruining a brand-new suit, she bent forward to feel about for it. Relief coursed through her as the top of the sack brushed against her fingers, and she was able to grasp it, tugging it quickly out of the water. Holding it aloft, she turned and began to wade out of the water, chanting a prayer under her breath that she had been quick enough. Reaching the shore, she dropped to her knees on the soft turf, ignoring the farmer who was moving closer as she quickly worked at the knot, holding the top of the sack closed until it gave. She tugged the bag open and peered fearfully inside, gasping at the handful of soaking, silky, dark-brown puppies that lay inside. She reached quickly in for the top pup, catching him by his back paws and lifting him out of the sack. She had barely moved him clear of the sack when his upside-down position moved him to retch up the water he had swallowed. Murmuring soothingly, Charlie laid him on the grass and quickly grabbed up the next pup, this time giving a little pat and shake to help urge him on, when the pup did not immediately toss up the river water as the first had. Once her urgings had worked, she set the pup aside and reached for the next in the sack. She repeated the action 6 more times and managed to save 6 of the 8 puppies. The last 2 were beyond help, and no amount of effort on her part would revive them. Giving up on the last pup, Charlie set him by the first one that had died and sighed unhappily. She stiffened when the farmer, who stood silently by throughout, shifted and spat on the ground near the 2 corpses. "Ah, well, them 2's beyond help, but 'twas a fine attempt just the same, my lord." Eyes narrowing to slits, she raised her head slowly and glared at the man, taking in his sun-baked skin, jowly cheeks and the grey peppering his red hair. "And sure enough it was, me lord. A fine effort. A mighty fine rescue, even if I do say so. You saved 6 out of the 8 of 'em. Now, let's see, that be... Well, I guess a growl would about cover it, seeing as how there's only 6 of 'em." Charlie shook her head in bewilderment. "What?" she asked, glancing distractedly down as one of the 6 puppies she had been able to save struggled weakly to its feet and shifted closer to her before collapsing onto its belly and settling down to some serious licking of her fingers, as if in gratitude. "For the pups," he explained, as if to a simpleton, drawing her gaze back to his solemn face. "You rescuing them and all. I figured on you wanting to buy 'em." "Buy them?" she repeated in disbelief. "Are you mad?" One rust and grey eyebrow arched at that. "You're not wanting to buy them?" When Charlie merely glared at him, fury and indignation making it impossible to speak, he shrugged and stooped to snatch up the bag she had discarded. "Well, what you go to all this trouble for, then? You just made more work for me. Now I'll be having to drown 'em again." So saying, he scooped up the pup who had been licking her fingers and plopped him back in the bag. "The devil you will!" Charlie roared and made a grab for the bag. Radcliffe had gone quite a distance with no sign of Charles, and had just decided Clarissa had been mistaken when a string of curses and shouts broke out from the woods ahead. He picked up his pace and soon found himself stepping into a clearing where a startling sight met his eyes. At first he merely stood, gaping at Charles and a burly farmer playing tug-of-war with a squirming sack. The size of the farmer foretold who the winner of the battle would be, and Radcliffe wasn't the least surprised when the lad's hands lost their grip on the sack and he tumbled onto his behind in the damp grass. Radcliffe's mild amusement turned to shock when the farmer then bent to grab up some puppies and Charles regained his feet and launched himself onto the man's back. Roaring in surprise and pain as Charles grabbed up handfuls of the man's hair and tugged viciously, the farmer dropped the bag and the pups and straightened abruptly, swatting at the boy as if he were a swarm of bees on his back. Charles deftly avoided the first hand that swatted at him, but the second one caught him upside of his head. The boy released a shriek of pain, but held determinedly onto his position. The blow had more effect on Radcliffe, however, who launched forward, bellowing, "What the devil goes on here?" The twosome froze. The farmer stilled in mid-blow and glanced guiltily toward him, while Charles heaved a sigh of relief and swiftly slid from the man's back. "Radcliffe!" The lad gasped, and took a step toward him, his relief obvious. He seemed to catch himself then, and glanced from Radcliffe to the farmer, then down at the squirming bag at his feet. Distressed yowls came muffled from inside it. "What is going on here, Charles?" Radcliffe asked, as the lad bent to open the sack and scoop out a furry bundle from inside. "Leave my dogs alone," the farmer growled as Charles quickly began snatching up the pups nearest. "Yours," he snapped back. "You threw them away." "Aye, and I'll be doing so again should you not pay for 'em." "The devil you will," Charles snarled, and glared at the man. "The devil I won't." The brute moved toward the lad then, and the boy danced quickly behind Radcliffe, struggling to hold on to the 4 squirming bodies he had managed to gather. The farmer stopped at once, apparently unwilling to accost a member of the nobility that was not attacking him. Suddenly, frustration crested on the man's face, and he whirled and moved to snatch up one of the 2 remaining pups. Lifting the animal, he held the body in one beefy hand and took the head with the other. "No!" Charles shrieked, stepping out from behind Radcliffe when the farmer made as if to break the poor animal's neck. The man paused and arched an eyebrow in inquiry, and Charles turned to glare at Radcliffe, pleading, "Do something!" Sighing, Radcliffe glanced from his annoying charge to the farmer, then back. "How can I do anything when I do not know what is happening?" "Can you not tell? Good God, this man!" Radcliffe's eyebrows rose at the way the word was said, and nearly laughed since the boy was insulting his own sex, but managed to restrain himself as the lad continued. "Tied these poor creatures in a sack and tossed them into the river to drown. I rescued them and managed to revive 6 out of the 8 of them. Now he expects me to pay for the 6 who lived, or he will throw them back into the water. Tell him he cannot do that. Tell him." Charles turned to glare at the farmer with an obvious combination of satisfaction and spite, nodding with grim triumph as he awaited Radcliffe's proclamation. That triumph died, transformed into dismay when Radcliffe finally spoke. "I'm afraid he can." "What?" "They are his dogs," he answered solemnly. "His? But he threw them away, to drown. He tried to kill them. They would be dead now, but for me. I found them." "They are still his to do with as he wishes," Radcliffe sighed, feeling as if he were letting the lad down by admitting such, and not liking it very much at all. "There you are, then," the farmer's barrelled chest puffed up with importance. "So, either you'll be paying me 6pence for the beasties, or I'll be breaking this one here's neck and drowning the rest." 6pence? A minute ago it was a grout. That was afore you attacked me." The boy glared at the man briefly, then set the squirming mass of puppies down and began digging through the pockets of his jacket, frowning when they came up empty. "I must have lost my money in the water. Pay the man, Radcliffe." He raised his eyebrows at the order, and the boy grimaced. "You know I am good for it." Heaving a sigh, Radcliffe dug out a small sack of coins and withdrew a silver one, which he handed to the man. The farmer's fierce scowl gave way to a beaming smile as he accepted it. Then he handed Radcliffe the pup he had been holding, gave a slight nod, bent to snatch up the sack still holding the 2 dead pups, and turned to saunter away. Radcliffe watched the man swagger off into the trees with distaste, then saw Charles sigh and glance down at the damp puppies that were presently climbing all over each other in an attempt to crawl up his sodden pant legs and gain his attention. "Poor darlings," Charles murmured, bending to scoop up 2 more of them. "'Tis all right. That nasty old man won't hurt you any more," the lad assured them, cuddling them close to his face. Then he caught the raised eyebrows Radcliffe was giving him. Frowning at him slightly, as if his behaviour were all Radcliffe's fault, Charles glanced toward the 2 pups still on the ground, then back to him with arched eyebrows. "Do you suppose you could pick up those 2? Radcliffe blinked at that. "Whatever for?" "Well, I can hardly carry all 6 of them by myself, can I?" His eyebrows drew down with unpleasant suspicion. "Why would you want to, anyway? You do not plan to keep those mutts, do you?" "What else did you think I would do?" the boy asked with open amazement. "I can hardly leave them here, for that farmer to kill later." "Well, you are certainly not bringing them back to my home," Radcliffe said, with a snort. "My lord?" Stokes' smile of greeting, as he hurried down the hall toward the open front door 2 hours later, turned into a gasp of surprise as 6 little brown fur balls suddenly erupted around his feet. Yipping excitedly, they flew past Radcliffe, dashing wildly, if a bit clumsily, every which way into the entry, legs flying out from beneath them on the polished marble floor as they tried to sniff everything at once. His mouth was still agape a moment later as each and every one of the creatures suddenly froze. Tails stiff and quivering excitedly, they lifted their noses upward and sniffed the air briefly, then made a mad dash down the hall toward the kitchens. "Oh, no, you don't!" Charlie cried, leaping past a pained-looking Radcliffe and charging after the pups, scooping one after another up into her arms. She grabbed up the last one just as it reached the kitchen door. Turning then, with the squirming bundle of bodies caught awkwardly in her arms, she started back down the hall, relieved when a laughing Beth hurried into the house and to Charlie's side to assist her with them. "Poor darlings," Beth laughed, taking 3 of them and cuddling them against her chest. "They must be hungry again." "I do not know how that is possible," Radcliffe sniffed, irritation marring his expression as he pushed the door closed with a decided crash. "They acted more like pigs than puppies at the picnic. After all the food they ate there, they should be full for a week." Charlie rolled her eyes at that, and Beth laughed. "Hardly, my lord. They were adorable at the picnic, quite a hit. Why, every woman in attendance descended on you and Charlie when you came out of the woods with the little wonders. They considered both of you to be quite the heroes, once a story of how you rescued them unfolded." Charlie's lips quirked at Radcliffe's disgruntled expression as he finished removing his gloves and slapped them against his butler's chest. The action finally startled the servant out of his stunned state. He closed his mouth and quickly caught the gloves, then accepted the hat Radcliffe shoved at him. Radcliffe had not stuck long to his refusal to take the pups home with them. What else could he do? They could hardly leave them there in the clearing to be killed. When Charlie had pointed that out to him and left the problem as to what to do with the animals up to him, he had quickly realized there was little other solution but to return home with them, temporarily. He had made that as clear as glass. This was a temporary situation, and one he did not appreciate. Charlie was to find a home for the beasts as quickly as possible, and they were not to be allowed to make a nuisance of themselves. Charlie had promised to keep the pups in her room and out of the way until she found them homes, then happily helped him cart the little furballs back through the woods to the picnic. As Beth said, the women in the party had descended on them at once when they had reappeared with the pups, cooing and sighing over the furry little monsters. Charlie had been more than aware of Radcliffe's discomfort under the avalanche of attention, and had not been surprised when he had extricated himself from the crowd and slipped off to join a group of older men to watch the foo-furore from a safe distance, leaving Charlie to deal with the attention and the puppies both. Not that she'd had much difficulty with the puppies. She'd had more than enough volunteers to aid in minding and feeding the little creatures. In fact, the other ladies had nearly come to blows as they'd fought over who got to hold, pet, and feed them. The pups had been fed the choicest bits of squab and dishes of pigeon pie by every female there. Still, they were puppies, energetic, happy, bounding everywhere to the delight of the picnic guests, and they now appeared already to be eager for more food. "Come along, Beth. Let us take them upstairs, then raid the kitchen for them." Shaking his head in disgust, Radcliffe turned on his heel and strode into the library, no doubt headed for the bottle of port that waited there. Charlie thought with amusement. She led Beth upstairs. "Oh, my lady! Just look at the gown Madame de Cowle sent today," Bessie cried excitedly, holding up the gown she had just unpacked as Beth led Charlie into Elizabeth's room. "It arrived only moments ago. Is it not lovely?" Beth paused in the doorway, 3 puppies in her arms and her eyes wide with a combination of dismay and alarm as she stared at the gossamer gown. Shoving the door closed with one foot, Charlie pushed past her stunned sister and set the puppies she held on the floor before walking over to survey the dress with a smile. "It is lovely, is it not, Bessie?" she murmured, smugly, then glanced toward Beth with amusement. "Faith, Beth, you have amazing taste," she complimented, laughter in her eyes as her sister stared at the burgundy gown. Beth had a preference for prim pastels and classic cuts, and as Beth had always been the one to stand as model for their gowns, Charlie had allowed her to choose the styles. They had spent the past several years dressed in pink, baby blue, white, and cream gowns with necklines that could be called nothing less than respectable. Charlie's taste, in comparison, was much more dramatic. Had she been concerned with fashion and the like through those years, she would have leaned more toward deeper, more vibrant colours and far more daring styles. Of course, she had not been concerned. Now that they were on the marriage market, however, it seemed to her that it was time to dress the window. The gown she had chosen was in the height of fashion, as low a décolletage as could be worn and still be thought respectable, and a jaunty little hat to top it off. Simple, stylish, and sexy as the devil, she hoped. It was obvious to her that Beth was taken aback at the gown. "Charlie, how could you?" "Bessie," Charlie interrupted, "please go downstairs and see if cook has anything for the puppies to eat, and a bowl of milk for them too," she added, as the maid set the gown down and moved to leave the room. "What have you done?" Beth whispered once the door had closed behind the girl, moving to stand by the bed to gape down at the gown. Charlie shrugged with unconcern. I choose clothes. Are they all like this? Of course not. They're all different styles and colours. What colours? Charlie's eyebrows rose at the menace in Beth's voice. Emerald green. Crimson. Crimson! Beth dropped onto the bed, her hands raising to cover her face. Oh, God! She pulled her hands away to stare at her sister in horror. Is this punishment for making you stand for the measuring? No, of course not. Charlie threw her sister a dirty look and spread the gown out. Really, Beth, just look at it. It is lovely. How can you think it a punishment? Why, 'tis a beautiful cut, the colour vibrant, the sheen to the material lovely. 'Tis loud. Nonsense. Charlie glowered at her for the insult to her taste, then sighed. Look, if you must know, I've always found your taste in gowns rather, well, to be honest, quite dull. Dull? Beth stood up, dismay on her face. Yes, all those pale pastels that melt into nothingness and high décolletage. She wrinkled her nose. They were all rather tedious, you know. Her sister's mouth worked briefly, then snapped shut, and she suddenly stood straight and tall, her expression cold. I see. Well, I am sorry to have burdened you with my tedious taste all these years. Charlie smiled faintly. It was not a burden, Beth. Had that been so, I would have chosen my own gowns long ago. Why did you not? Shrugging, Charlie touched the burgundy gown reverently, a pleased smile touching her lips at how well her choice had turned out. She answered distractedly, There seemed little reason to bother. It was not as if anyone actually saw me in them, out in the country. At her sister's outraged gasp, she glanced at her sharply, suddenly recognizing the insult she had dealt. She shook her head at once. Now, Beth, do not take it so. 'Tis just that our tastes differ somewhat. You are right, of course. I just never realized how much. Her mouth firming, Beth peered at the gown. I cannot wear this, Charlie. I would not feel comfortable. Why ever not? Our colouring is perfect for burgundy. Perhaps in your opinion, but I prefer the pastels. Besides, I can tell from just looking at it that the neckline is indecently low. 'Tis not indecent, 'tis all the rage. Mayhap, but I could not possibly wear it. I would feel uncomfortable. On display, I prefer a more understated style with nice pastels, Charlie finished for her dryly. Beth, you are on the marriage market now. 'Tis no time to play the shrinking violet, unless you wish to be a wallflower. You must display your wares. I cannot do it. 'Tis not my style. I will not wear it. Before Charlie could think of what to say to that, Bessie returned, carrying a silver salver. The excitement on the young girl's face distracted both sisters from their discussion. You will never believe it, the girl cried, setting the tray down and grabbing a handful of paper scraps off it to rush to them. Look, just look. They are invitations to balls and such. Master Stokes says that a couple of them came this morning, but that the door-knocker has been banging non-stop since you returned from the picnic. This one is for a ball at the Hardings. Tonight, Beth cried, opening one. They were at the theatre last night, Charlie. Thomas pointed them out to me. Smiling at her sister's excitement, Charlie took out one of the invitations to read. The Seawoods are having a ball tomorrow evening, and we are invited, Charlie murmured with a small perplexed frown. Who are the Seawoods? They were at the picnic today. Their daughter Lily was one of the women helping you with the dogs. Beth answered distractedly as she read another invitation. Oh, look! The Walcotts! They were at the picnic too, and here is one from the Fetterleys. Oh, Charlie, we are a success! We shall be married in no time. You shall, Charlie corrected quickly. Oh, I. Beth glanced self-consciously at Bessie, then away. Picking up another invitation, Charlie opened it, then froze. What is it? Beth asked, aware of her reaction at once. "Bessie, please arrange for a bath to be brought up for each of us, and ask cook to prepare an early dinner." "Aye, sir." Bobbing, the girl left the room, and Charlie handed the note she had opened to Beth. "I know who you are," Beth read with dismay. "If you do not want me to tell, you'll have to pay. Bring—" "My God!" She lifted horrified eyes to Charlie. "What are we going to do?" Standing, Charlie paced to the window and peered blindly out. She stayed like that for a moment, then suddenly turned back. "We are going to the Hardings' ball tonight. Then tomorrow I shall see Mr. Silverpot to cash in some more of Mother's jewels. Tomorrow night you shall have Radcliffe escort you to the Seawoods' ball. I shall claim to be too tired to attend, and will meet this person to pay them off." Beth bit her lip. "Charlie, I do not like the idea of you meeting this person alone. It could be dangerous." "Aye, but one of us has to keep Radcliffe busy," Charlie pointed out with a sigh. "Well," standing, Beth moved to the connecting door of the rooms. "I suppose I should start getting ready. You said the tailor sent some new clothes around?" Charlie's eyebrows rose. "Hi. Did you not wish to be Elizabeth tonight?" Beth shrugged, but her gaze was annoyed as it fell upon the burgundy gown. "Nay, you have to be Charles tomorrow night, so you should be Elizabeth this evening." Chapter 10. Charlie sank back into the carriage seat with a weary sigh. This night had been an unmitigated disaster. The Hardings' ball, her first actual social event as a female, had gone over like a stone. She had not danced with anyone but Radcliffe and Thomas Mulberry. She had not even had a chance to meet prospective husbands. Thomas had hovered over her like a lovesick calf, and Radcliffe had behaved like some dowager aunt, guarding her virginity and glowering at any male who came near her, including an obvious Thomas. Meanwhile, Beth Charles had fluttered about anxiously, babbling away to Thomas. Charlie had suffered the ridiculous charade until her head and feet both ached, and that was the excuse she had used to end the farce, her aching feet and head. Immediately solicitous, Radcliffe had insisted on taking her home. Beth Charles had shown enough reluctance to leave that Thomas had suggested that she stay, and he would drop her off later. Nodding, Radcliffe had ushered the woman he thought was Elizabeth out of the ballroom. The carriage hit a rut in the road, and Charlie grabbed for something to hold on to as she was jostled against Radcliffe's side. "Are you all right?" Charlie glanced up at him through the dim interior of the carriage, slightly startled by the husky sound of his voice. She was even more startled by the sudden intensity of his eyes as he looked down at her. Swallowing, she licked her lips nervously and began to nod, only to pause self-consciously when his gaze dropped to her lips with interest. Dropping her head shyly, she peered blindly at her hand for a moment, then realized that it was clutching his thigh. She pulled it away with dismay. "Oh, I am sorry, my lord. I did not mean to—" "'Tis all right," he assured her gently. "I know it was not on purpose. How is your head?" "Muzzy," she murmured distractedly, wondering why her hand had begun to tingle the moment she'd realized where she had placed it, while searching for something sturdy to hold on to. "Muzzy." Concern filling his voice, he slid a finger beneath her chin to lift her face up for his inspection. "Is your headache worse?" "Nay," she admitted on a sigh, then asked plaintively, "Is it hot in here?" "Nay, 'tis a cool evening." He was beginning to frown now, anxiety drawing small lines on his forehead as he raised a hand to feel hers. "Mayhap you are coming down with something." Charlie was beginning to suspect her problem had nothing to do with a true illness. She seemed to be one huge ball of sensitivity. She was very aware of his nearness, could feel the pressure of his leg along her own, his breath on her face, the scent of him in her nose, and the memory of their shared kiss when last she'd played Beth was now crowding her mind. Feeling herself sway slightly toward him, she drew herself up and pulled back as far as the carriage wall would allow. "These carriages are very small, are they not?" she asked in a high, strained voice. Radcliffe blinked, dragging his gaze away from her chest where it had dropped when she had suddenly leaned back. "Small?" He glanced around the dark interior of the hack. They hit another rut, and Charlie would have bounced right onto the floor if Radcliffe had not caught her and drawn her protectively against his